Mitt Romney said the country was in a worse state now than when President Obama took office.
We weren't always successful at Bain, but no one ever is in the real world of business. That's what this president doesn't seem to understand. Business and growing jobs is about taking risk, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, but always striving. It's about dreams. Usually it doesn't work out exactly as you might have imagined. Steve Jobs was fired at Apple, and then he came back and changed the world. It's the genius of the American free enterprise system to harness the extraordinary creativity and talent and industry of the American people with a system that's dedicated to creating tomorrow's prosperity, not trying to redistribute today's. That's why every president since the Great Depression who came before the American people asking for a second term could look back at the last 4 years and say with satisfaction, you're better off than you were 4 years ago, except Jimmy Carter, and except this president. This president can ask us to be patient. This president can tell us it was someone else's fault. This president can tell us that the next 4 years he'll get it right. But this president cannot tell us that you're better off today than when he took office.
And that's Mitt Romney in his presidential nomination address. Arun Gupta, he invoked Steve Jobs. You have written extensively about the company that makes Apple products in China, Foxconn.
Yeah, both parties trip over themselves to praise Steve Jobs and Apple, the largest corporation in the world by stock market capitalization.
Because when people often do those number counts in speeches, they often say, how many times did the person mention Jobs?
Yeah.
And so they like to say Steve Jobs.
Exactly. But you know, I think, you know, this is supposed to be the model for the 21st century. And yet, so what is the Apple economy? There is a massive workforce. It's essentially much of it's based in China or other third world countries in these Dickensian factories. The jobs that are in the U.S., it's not all these engineering or creative jobs. It's basically this contingent, overwork workforce with no benefits. They're gilded Walmarts that work at these the Apple stores. And so this is not any sort of economic model that's going to address the severe structural economic crises afflicting this country.
We're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back. Arun Gupta is regular contributor for Alternate Truth Out and The Guardian. And Craig Unger has just published a new book. It's called Boss Rove. And when we come back, we're going to hear one of Craig Unger's interactions with Karl Rove this week here in Tampa at the Republican National Convention. Stay with us. Megan Smith covering the Pixies' signature song, Here Comes Your Man. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, breaking with convention, war, peace, and the presidency. We're covering the Republican National Convention, and next week, the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte, inside and out. I'm Amy Goodman. We're here in Tampa. It is the morning after the Republican presidential acceptance address of Mitt Romney. Our guests discussing this are Arun Gupta and Craig Unger. Craig just came out with a new book called Boss Rove, and I want to talk about this for a moment. Earlier this week at the Republican National Convention, Craig Unger confronted the subject of his most recent book, Republican political strategist Karl Rove.
Hi, I'm Craig Unger from Vanity Fair.
Yes, of course you are.
And I also have a new book coming out next week called Boss Rove.
This is where Unger is going to flag his book. Go ahead, Unger. Launch away.
Before and during the Republican primaries on Fox News and in the Wall Street Journal, you were highly critical of Sarah Palin, Donald Trump, Herman Cain, Rick Santorum,
we don't read questions here. Just be quick.
And Gingrich. Were you doing that intentionally to help Romney's chances, and did you discuss it at all with Roger Ailes?
No and no. And I was complimentary of some of those same people at different times. But if, for example, when Donald Trump went out and Rick Perry went out and embraced the birther issue, I was critical of it. Unger's got an interesting book. I'm responsible for the murder of Mike O'Connell.
Well, did not say that.
Well, comes very artfully close to saying it. He also depends upon a nut named Dana Jill Simpson, who claims that I personally got her to investigate Governor Siegelman of Alabama. And this is going to be an entertaining work of fiction. I wish you all the best with it.
Misrepresenting.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not at all.
That's Karl Rove. Craig Unger, you're the author of Boss Rove, Inside Karl Rove's Secret Kingdom of Power. Talk about this interaction and each of the points that, well, Karl Rove makes.
Well, I was a little surprised he took on the book. Normally he's a very, very disciplined political operative, and here he sort of lost it. I think strategically he would have been smarter to just ignore me and ignore the book. But instead, he put a lot of attention on it. And again, he seems to blame this woman he referred to, Dana Jill Simpson. She had absolutely nothing to do with the question I asked about was he collaborating with Roger Ailes. And he also very explicitly misrepresented the book and said that I called him a murderer, which I do not in any way, shape, or form.
Well, explain what he was referring to.
Well, in the Ohio election of 2004, there were an enormous number of accusations of fraud, and there were investigations, civil lawsuits, and so forth. And at each stage, an enormous amount of material of evidence was destroyed. A court ordered that the ballots actually be impounded, but they were destroyed. I talked to the Democratic Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner, who succeeded the Republican, and she had planned to investigate it as soon as she got to office. But she happened to go by her office just before she officially took over the job, and when she walked in, she saw the shredding of thousands and thousands of documents. And finally, a man named Mike Connell, who was Rove's computer guru, was said to be very, very knowledgeable. He was about to be a witness, and he went down in a plane crash at a time that happened to be very crucial in the investigation.
And so his point that you're calling him a murderer?
Absolutely. That's where he got that from.
But the significance of Karl Rove here, while everyone is covering the pomp on the floor of the convention, our videographer, Sam Alkoff, was filming. He figured out which was the skybox of Sheldon Adelson, who is the multi-billionaire casino magnate in Las Vegas, who has promised to give something like $100 million to the Republican Party, and now spending, and has switched from Newt Gingrich now to Mitt Romney. There in the skybox, we were able to focus on Sheldon Adelson and Karl Rove last night as Mitt Romney was addressing the convention.
Right. Well, it's even Rove's colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, Alan Murray, are asking him, isn't this a complete perversion of the electoral process? And by contrast, John McCain in 2008 spent $375 million. Rove has about $1 billion. The Koch brothers alone say they may put up as much as $400 million. And when you add in Romney and the RNC's take, you're up to $1.8 billion, nearly 5 times as much as John McCain spent 4 years ago. So you can imagine all that money flooding into the battleground states in a very targeted way at the key moment. And we'll have to see what difference it makes.
Your comment on this?
I think actually one of the things that goes unremarked is we've kind of entered the era of big science politics. What big science is about is like the cyclotron. You spend massive amounts of money for incremental improvements. If we actually look at the number of swing states and how small the number of swing voters are in those swing states, we may be talking about only a pool of 4 to 6 million votes are being fought over. Yet over $2 billion is going to be spent in this election. That's something like $300 to $500 per voter. I think in the future it'll just be easier to give them vouchers.
When Romney walked down the aisle toward the stage Thursday night for the biggest moment of his life to accept the Republican presidential nomination, he was shaking a number of people's hands. What didn't go very much noticed is as he came to the New York delegation, he shook the hand of conservative billionaire and major political donor David Koch. Groups in the network of David Koch and his brother Charles intend to spend nearly something like $400 million ahead of the 2012 election. David Koch was honored yesterday by Americans for Prosperity, the Koch-backed nonprofit that's been spending money on campaign ads. David Koch told the news site Politico yesterday, interestingly, in an interview that he disagrees with the Republican Party's stance on same-sex marriage, believes the United States should consider raising taxes in order to balance the budget. When Koch sat down as a member of the New York delegation on Thursday night on the convention floor, I went over to ask him a question. While he started to answer me, the delegates and security around him stood up one by one, creating a human wall between us. One of those who stood up was Ed Cox. He's chair of the Republican Party of New York and the son-in-law of President Richard Nixon. Koch and Cox had been seated side by side. So first, you hear my attempt to question David Koch. We're going to try to play that in a moment. But the issue of money in politics, Craig Unger.
Well, it is extraordinary because the spectacle everyone witnessed, the 15,000 reporters report on, is the nomination of Mitt Romney. What I saw really happening off screen was the coronation of Karl Rove as the party boss. And it means that he has an unelected position, it has no term limits, and he gets to preside over this vast, vast sum of money and to engineer how it will be spent. And he can do so not just for this election, but for the foreseeable future.
I think we should also not forget the base of the Republican Party, because certainly it's fueled by billionaires, but the base, the Tea Party base, very much supports it. And, you know, looking around the convention hall, it had all the diversity of a 1950s country club. But nonetheless, you know, the Tea Party really supports this notion of meritocracy. If you're rich, it's because you are successful, and so then you must be smart and capable.
I want to go to that questioning of David Koch right now. Mr. Koch, do you think unchecked concentration of wealth will undermine democracy?
I couldn't quite hear you. Sorry, I'm deaf in one ear. We're not doing interviews this evening.
Let me ask the question again.
Thank you so much.
I know, let me ask the question again.
Situations. We're here to listen to the speeches. We would help them grow. We're not here to try to make their companies.
Well, let me ask Mr. Cox then. Mr. Cox, do you think unchecked concentration of wealth will undermine democracy?
Things went wrong, we would not.
What we need is a country led by Mitt Romney with a vision of an opportunity society of free people and free enterprise. That's what made this country great, and that's what he's going to do, and that's his vision.
Are you concerned about, especially young people, looking at what's happening in the country where a handful of multimillionaires and billionaires are so disproportionately determining the democratic process?
That's a statement that isn't true. This country is governed by the people. That's what it's always been based on.
Will you keep this moving?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Okay, one deep, I got you. Mr. Cox answered a question. Why can't Mr. Koch answer a question? I only have one question.
And that company not only survived, it thrived. And today, Beta Company is recognized as one of the best.
Yes, but we're media.
Disrupting the convention.
I'm not. Do you think media is disrupting the convention? I thought you welcome press coverage. You know you use the press all the time. I'm asking one question, and you answer the press's questions. I have one question. I asked Mr. Cox.
And that's great, and that individual apparently does not want to talk to you.
I don't know. He can't even see me.
This is a security issue. Because Mr. Romney's speaking in a couple hours.
That's why we're here.
So we'd appreciate it.
Mitt found time to serve his church.
But this is the press. We're allowed to ask questions, and we're doing it in a dignified and respectful way.
We do need to clear this aisle, so you're going to have to move.
The time's not appropriate.
Thank you.
Basically, this happens all the time at this convention around Mr. Koch, one of the most powerful forces at this convention. When you go up to ask him a question, a group of men stand up all around him and make it impossible or protect him from the press. These are supposed to be celebrations of democracy, these conventions. There's a reason why both conventions welcome 15,000 journalists. They want to get their message out. But we are not supposed to be simply stenographers to power. We are there to ask serious questions and to follow the money. This is Democracy Now!, and we're on the floor of the Republican National Convention.
Well, that was my attempt to interview David Koch on the floor of the Republican National Convention. When Mitt Romney made his entrance, he walked down the aisle of the Republican Convention. As he approached the New York delegation, he shook the hand of State Republican Party Chair Ed Koch, and then he shook hands with David Koch. While Democracy Now! Was there on the floor and captured the handshake on video, the pool feed that went out that the network's broadcast cut away just before the handshake to show footage of two enthusiastic young women supporters and then an overhead shot of the convention center. Then the shot came back to Romney shaking hands further down the aisle as he ascended the stage. This is significant because of how powerful David Koch is for Mitt Romney, who didn't originally have his support, mind you, Craig. Is that right? It went to Newt Gingrich, who we also saw in Sheldon Adelson's suite last night and the night before. But Mitt Romney went to shake his hand. He put his hand on his shoulder last night. This is as he's coming to give this, his acceptance address, and pointed at him.
Right, and in part, I think this is the triumph of Karl Rove. In fact, you do have a real schism in the Republican Party between the establishment and the Tea Party, and Karl Rove was really embodied the establishment. Romney was much more of an establishment candidate. He was not a Tea Party favorite. You had Rove shooting in the back quietly behind the scenes every one of Romney's rivals during the primaries. And Romney never really caught fire. He rarely got more than 20, maybe 30% of the vote in the primaries, but he outlasted every one as they were shot in the back. And finally, Rove was able to harness that Tea Party dynamism, but also to get the big backers of the Tea Party, the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson, and that meant vast, vast sums of money that they're able to spend today.
I want to thank you both for being with us. Craig Unger and Arun Gupta. Arun is regular contributor for Alternet, and Craig Unger wrote Boss Rove, Inside Karl Rove's Secret Kingdom of Power, which hits bookshelves on September 4th, contributing editor at Vanity Fair, where you can read an excerpt of Boss Rove. We'll link to it at our website, democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the speech of Clint Eastwood. Stay with us. The mystery speaker.